Hi, this is Joe Wood, and I'm. This is my means of completing Module 6 for my teaching certificate for Fort Hays State University, Class 803. Um, and our topic today is ethical dilemmas and things of that nature, and kind of coming up with your own ethical philosophy. And so I've titled my presentation "The Ethical Teacher: Easier Said Than Done" by myself. So, kind of an overview or introduction here. Um, so, I've got 1 year of experience teaching so far, and then obviously some research for this assignment through the course of the weekend. Um, and so, I kind of broke it down similar to what the Kansas State Department of Education does. So, our ethical responsibilities of a teacher, our responsibility to the student, our responsibility to the district, our responsibility to the profession. And those are kind of the three areas that the Kansas State Department of Education has broke down the responsibilities in this. And then I put down kind of the deliberation process, or kind of how you process through the information, and how you deem it to be ethical in the appropriate situation. So, responsibilities to the student. So, as a teacher, we have a duty to take care of our students, and so kind of what we highlight in that. I broke down. I pulled most of this information from the Kansas State Department of Education, and kind of broke it into these three different levels. When it comes to a learning environment, to set an example, and to meet the needs to as a mandatory reporter. And so, from a learning environment, our duty to our student is to create and support and maintain a positive, challenging learning environment for our students. Right? It's to model the way through professionalism, through maintaining confidentiality with our students in a genuine way, to demonstrate the need for continued intellectual growth, to be involved in our community and demonstrate civic duty and responsibility, to make sure that we're being tactful with our students, controlling our own emotions, being fair, honest, being filling that role as a mentor for our students, to be an advocate for our students, to build relationships with our students. But those are all very important parts of the learning environment and setting an example for our kids in the classroom. Mandatory reporting, obviously, that's assessing the situations and reporting what um, is mandated and necessary for us to report. We could do a whole slide, big papers on all of that stuff. But quick overview of, and then as we transition into our responsibility to our district. So, as a teacher, our responsibility to our district is obviously there's the contractual obligation: show up, come to work, be on time, know the days you're supposed to be here, the times you're supposed to be here, don't leave early. Obviously, fill out the appropriate paperwork for sickness and vacation and things of that nature. And honestly, to show up and be professional, be ethical, and have a good, positive um, demeanor about yourself. Enjoy your job, enjoy life, and help that rub off on your kids. So the second one I have on there is model and inspire. Right. So model and inspire, obviously your peers, from a district level, from all the employees standpoint, demonstrate responsibility for the property of the school district, for the funds of the school district, show respect for the policies and procedures. It's an important part of the process. And then reporting and documentation. You know, reflect, review, and complete the appropriate reports, the appropriate documentation that you need to do. Make sure to follow the appropriate procedures. Um, and like I said, make sure that we're not abusing the funds of the school or the supplies of the school. Make sure that we're being good stewards. Uh, and then our responsibility to the profession, or to the teaching profession as a whole. I pulled this from the National Association of State Directors of Teachers Education and Certifications website. They actually have a very similar um, breakdown, but they actually have a couple more components to it beyond student, district, and profession. But what their profession spent most of its energy on was the responsibility to self as an ethical professional. So be knowledgeable of the code, procedures, policies, rules, etc. Make sure that we know those. Ignorance of those um, isn't, it's just because you didn't know what the speed limit was, um, doesn't mean you still weren't speeding. So uphold these things in an ethical manner and take care of yourself. Take care of your mental health, your physical health, emotional health, um, so that way you can be there for your students and for the district. So, responsibility to resolve ethical issues, right? Take responsibility, have the confidence to stand up if there's something that needs to be stood up for, um, maintain fidelity, cooperation, never discriminate, right? Those are all things that for us we need to be ready to address and attempt to do what's right, especially when it comes to ethical issues. Responsibility to promote and advocate for the profession, right? So, support a positive impact on education, right? So, this idea that, you know, we need to enjoy our job and we need to portray that to our students. I feel like, unfortunately, we get into this, we don't get paid enough, we work too hard, and we're not selling our profession very well. Um, we get our summers off. I mean, you can put up with a lot to get 2 months off and still have a salary that allows you to be able to provide for your family. And so actively participate and advocate in the profession, right? So get involved, be on committees, you know, um, join, WNEA, those kinds of things. Be involved, and continue your education. Right, keep growing personally. The deliberation, processing, applying. Right, these are all great things. We talk about this stuff, and I really liked this. It's one of the websites that we researched for the assignment, and it kind of broke down. Kind of how we process through ethical decisions through three frameworks. They called one of them was consequential, which is kind of that cause and effect, focused on the future. Right, the sense of duty was more focused on the situation, the rules, regulations. Rules say this, this, and then virtue, which is the sense of overall character of the person, positive, negative, and how to be the most virtuous person. And so I really relate to kind of all three of those, to be completely honest. And I really liked I went ahead and quoted it at the end of the article. Basically talked about the conclusion. Making ethical decisions requires sensitivity to the ethical implications of problems and situations. It also requires practice, having a framework for ethical decision making. And then they obviously talk about how they hope the information is useful, but I did think it just helps kind of deliberate. So here, in conclusion, ethical decisions is really hard. You got to be sensitive, and there's different problems, different situations, and what we're trying to everyone needs to develop experience through practice to develop their own framework for decision making. And it's like, so good luck if you're a rookie because you don't have much practice. And so it's an ongoing process. And so kind of my personal reflection on this, and, where I kind of sit, is, I kind of reference Coos and Posner. I minored in leadership in college in my undergrad. And so I always kind of feel myself in kind of the situational, transformational leadership. I've always felt like each situation calls for evaluation, so to speak. And then I also think that transformational leadership, and I think those kind of between my combination of those two is this idea that we're constantly transforming as a leader. And so that kind of ties into the previous slide about being consequential, that we learn as we go through. And then obviously the idea of the virtuous piece, a virtue that here we are growing as a person through the process. And sometimes I do think that in some instances, a mistake isn't made if a lesson's learned. And there's lots of situations you can apply that to where that's not correct. And there are certain situations you can apply it to where it is appropriate. But from a situational leadership standpoint, it's definitely very consequential and duty, because there might be a rule, and the rule is meant for this situation. And if you take that same rule and apply it to a different situation, while it might be the over overarching rule, it might not actually be the appropriate rule for this situation. And so the ability to use the judgment to know what the intent behind that rule is. It's hard to make good rules. And when you're making a rule trying to fix this problem, sometimes it has negative implications on another problem. So traits that I'm really big on, when I really think of leadership and when I think of from an ethical leadership standpoint, is how are we going to appropriately model the way? How can we inspire a shared vision within our classrooms? How do you challenge the process in an ethical way? And I really think of that challenging the process, especially when we think there's ethical issues. How do we enable others to act, right? And so how can we support other people in our profession? How can we encourage other people in our profession? And so I think that there's just a number of those pieces that all kind of fall into this category for this week's assignment. And so that kind of wraps up the end of my assignment. I apologize for being late. And these are my references that I used when putting this together and formulating kind of a big picture idea of the type of teacher I want to be.